Okay, welcome to all to FMDiSC July 2021. I believe it's already July. Everyone find your seats. The bathroom is down the hall. You know where you parked. Slight change of plans on the discussion. Beverly Voth called me this morning and said they'd had a major storm in Kentucky. She was up most of the night and wasn't able to present. So we're going to fill in a little bit. Christian Schmitz is going to share some new functions that will be released next week on his Monkey Bread software plugin. We want to ask you to remember to mute yourselves during the discussion so that you only put words into the meeting or background sounds when you intend to. A real easy way to temporarily unmute yourself is to hold down your space bar. Okay, so Mike Duncan is here and I'm just gonna let him introduce himself. And you want to start your video, Mike, or are you just going to share your desktop?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen here. And get this out of the way. Down there. There. How's that? Everybody see me?
Yep.
Welcome. I'm Mike Duncan from Soliant Consulting. My cohort, Bill Heiser, is actually halfway across the country on a motorcycle ride. Otherwise, he'd be here with us today. So good luck with Bill. So I presented this maybe about a month ago to the Kentucky user group. So it's largely the same, but made a few changes and I've had some more demos. So hopefully get something new out of it. So the topic here is using storing container data in the cloud with AWS S3 in particular, right? And I want to call out that we kind of had a good achievement this year of getting to a new partnership level with AWS. It was kind of a high bar for us. We needed to get several certifications in line, including a couple Solution Architect professional or professional level certifications. So we've got that going, and we got that partnership in. And I only want to point that out just to say this discussion is kind of I don't want to frame it in this is the way you should do things. I just want to put out options that this is one of the ways you can consider, as opposed to storing it with anybody else or just using container data in FileMaker. And we can go over those options too. We'll be looking at those. So we're kind of comparing it with external container data in FileMaker. And I kind of made a list of different considerations when you're doing that in FileMaker. What you need to think about storing container data. I mean, we almost never want to store container data directly in the file anymore, right? We've got the option to store it externally. So there is kind of a list of things to think about, including backups and disaster recovery. We definitely want to think about that. What I want to kind of call out is the atomicity of container data. This has kind of come up again in some of my discussions. When you're letting FileMaker handle that, it does kind of act as just another part of the database or just another field in the database, right? So you do have that kind of consistency where your container data is seen as part of the record, right? And then we've got a list of, if we're going to store this in the cloud, separate from our data, or from our database, right? There's a different list of considerations, things to take into consideration. Availability, disaster recovery kind of comes into it too. One thing I want to point out if you're using this in FileMaker, then if you're going to be making this data available is part of to any web applications, if that is going to be metered in any kind of data API, or now we've got OData, how that's metered, and how you handle that. One place I've seen people overrun their that data API limit is, for example, one person or one place they stored their container data as base64 and just pumped it all through the data API, and that ran it up pretty quick. And then, of course, we'll take a look at cost. I did want to call out too about there is kind of an open discussion of how do other databases handle storage, right? And should you be storing binary data in part of your database? So there's no right or wrong answer here. We're just exploring options, and there could be different projects, different situations where you want to use one versus the other. So this idea of decoupling your application, this is kind of an overall theme in cloud architecture and cloud native applications, right? Of not having a single point of failure, not having a single process, right? You want to distribute your workload and make your application more scalable. So this also has the advantage of decreasing the processing required from the data, the Rto engine in FileMaker, right? If you're serving up container data, even if it's just to FileMaker, not through the data API or anything, the FileMaker engine has to handle serving up all that container data as well. So this is also a way of increasing performance, where all that bandwidth has to come from your FileMaker server. Whereas if your data is, say, referenced in S3, then you're getting it from a different location, not just all one single server. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this concept, but I did want to throw it out here. This acid versus
This is
base.
Angie, right? Annie?
Yeah.
She worked for this company called Angel City Data as well.
So the as FileMaker developers, you're probably familiar with this ACID model, right? Whether you know it or not, it kind of follows along with this model where we want all our record commits to be complete transactions, right? And isolated, atomic, consistent, all that stuff. So compare this with this base model where it's more about basic availability, where the things are eventually going to be consistent. And an example of this in S3 more follows this base model, where a specific example, if you put an object into S3, it's going to be immediately available. But if you do an overwrite, if you upload the same object again, then it has what's called eventual consistency, where that gets uploaded. And then in S3, it's actually stored redundantly across all availability zones or data centers that are in a specific region. So you'll get the initial commit, but then it'll eventually be consistent across all availability zones. So why would you choose base over ACID? Well, the big thing is that base is massively scalable. This is the model that bigger companies like Facebook and stuff, they use this base model, and that's how they achieve this massive scale. So I want to go over some security best practices, right? And when we're scoping out privileges that we are going to be using with any kind of service, there's this principle of least privilege, where we want to limit what our credentials are going to allow us to do to be only the intended functionality. So we've got pretty granular control over what that can do. So it's just kind of a best practice. I have seen some examples of, people using root credentials or creating just, just give me admin, then that way I can do everything. And that's really not the direction you want to be going. And it doesn't take too much time to go in and, if you know what you're doing, and just create credentials that have just the permissions for what you want to allow that to do. And then there is kind of an open discussion of an ongoing, of course, security is an ongoing thing of how to handle those credentials in your FileMaker apps. So where to store those credentials, making sure they're secure, and whether or not you store them in FileMaker at all, or whether you inherit it from, say, if you're doing a perform script on server, if you can inherit credentials from the machine, if that's also in an AWS space, that it gets inherited from the role assigned to that resource. I always have this slide in most of, every time I'm talking about anything AWS. There is a really good white paper and a series of white paper that drill down into each of these different areas called the well-architected framework. So these are just a set of fundamentals to have in mind. Like anytime I'm trying to build something or starting a new project, even planning out, I've got, at minimum these different points in mind. So I just like to reference this and point that out for these types of projects. So what is S3? So S3, the 3 S's are simple storage service. This was one of the first services that AWS offered, right? And it's object storage as opposed to block storage. So block storage is more like a volume that you would be able to attach to an operating system, right? That's the difference versus object. Object, you can think of it as just a really big database that, at a very simple level, it would just have 2 fields, like the key and then the value being your binary data that's in that that's stored in that object, and the key being like a URL that leads back to it, right? So it's built to be massively scalable, right? Durable by design, redundancy built in, and they do keep adding a bunch of features. And another big advantage is, if you were provisioning block storage, you need to have enough size to store whatever you're going to have in that. Whereas using object storage in S3, you don't have to worry about ever running out of space, right? It's just about infinitely scalable. You do have a lot of options here in AWS as opposed to other services where you can get granular, you can get real specific about, say, I need this object to be stored in a bucket in a specific region. So you can plan that out, if your deployment is for an office in, somebody out west, say right in California, that you don't necessarily put that in North Virginia, right? You can provision that locally to wherever it's going to best suit the application needs. And then, of course, there's cost considerations, right? Your object storage costs are going to be a fraction of what your block storage costs are in the cloud. And there are different price tiers available. And we'll go into some of those. So when we talk about the feature richness, and they keep adding more features over time, but it's got a really nice set of features that you can enable kind of out of the box. You can enable versioning, where if you upload a new version, you automatically, it stores it as a new version, and you can access that through either the API or directly through the console. Pre-signed URLs is a way of using your credentials to generate a URL that's going to expire in a specific amount of time. And that still keeps it secure, where it's not necessarily open to the world, but you need to generate that URL, and that's kind of a best practice for any kind of access. You can create lifecycle rules and apply them to an entire bucket or on a specific object, where say you want to change a price tier over a certain time, or maybe you want to just delete expire an object after a certain amount of time. Maybe you only need it for a month, and that needs to, and then that can go away. You can configure all that from S3. It's got a number of different features for, say, different compliances. Say you're a law firm that has to retain their data for a certain amount of time. You can put an object lock on those objects, so they don't accidentally get deleted, right? And then, of course, the big thing is when you're storing your objects in S3, that's kind of a gateway to these other AWS services. And I've got several different examples of them, especially like the recognition, translate, poly, etc. And then there is also, I wanted to mention this concept of a data lake, right? And this is where you may have text files out in S3. A good example of this would be like logs, where you store logs out there, and then you have a service like Glue or Athena, right, where you can call and it'll either query that data directly, or it'll crawl that and collate that data and make it available in some other form. So those are just a couple examples. So here's a specific use case, right? Just for comparison, we've got 1 terabyte of external stored container data in FileMaker, right? And then when we do that, then of course we gotta you want to store backups of that, right? And there's a couple different concepts right here, Rto and Rpo, right? If you need to recover from some kind of disaster, those are the two things to consider, right? Your recovery time and your recovery point. So at what point are you going to recover back to? And then comparing that with 1 terabyte stored in S3, where it's decoupled, scalable. And then if we want to look at the cost breakdown, how that works. So for container data, right, we've got 1 terabyte stored on a 1.5 terabyte volume, right? We have some space provision for backups, right? On a 2 terabyte volume. So, and these are just the on-demand costs for like block storage in S3. So on-demand block storage is going to be $350 a month, or about $4,200 per year. So compare that with the cost in S3 to store container data on 1 terabyte worth of data, right? Where you don't have backups because it's automatically redundant, and the cost per month at the standard tier is $23.56 per month, right? So quite a bit of difference. And one easy thing to switch on, if you switch to intelligent tier, it kind of analyzes your data and how often you're accessing it, and switches objects that are not referenced as much to a lower costing class. So it can, be a nice, easy way to just, flip something on to get some additional cost savings. I wanted to show some data migration scenarios. So we worked with a client that had quite a bit of data on premises that they needed to get up into S3. So it was going to take like a couple weeks with the bandwidth that they had there. They had enough data to transfer all at once. So we looked at this Snow option. So with AWS Snow is it's a service where you ordered a device like a hard drive, and they send it to you. You copy the data on that, and you ship it back to AWS, and they put it in S3. And it comes in a couple different varieties. Snow comes in one we used. The Snowball is about the size of like a standard like PC case, right? And these are all like secure, tamper-proof devices that are extra durable, so that you can ship. Except for the Snowmobile, which I don't even have pricing on the Snowmobile. That's actually where they send out a whole semi, and they've got like petabyte storage on the back of the semi. So in our case, the snow cone example, this was kind of cool. When we finished up our data migration, right? You hit the button, like you're all done. It's got an e-ink display that just automatically shows a shipping label. All you got to do is take that back to the local UPS office, drop it off, and they take care of shipping it back to AWS. So that was pretty slick. It's a pretty nice experience. All right, we can get on some of these demos. Any questions so far? I think silence is good. So this example, I wanted to give like a little bit more polished kind of demo as a scenario where, see, we've got some records, and we've got where we might have pictures associated with a certain property here in this scenario. And instead of interactive container, we're actually showing a web viewer. So we've got a few script triggers going on here. Every time we go to a new record, every time we click on a new row, what it's doing is it's generating a pre-signed URL back to the object in S3 and just displaying that in a web viewer. Right, you see, we can kind of click through. And I mean, performance-wise, it's kind of, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, as far as the bandwidth on the client side, right? Because whether you're getting this container data from the FileMaker server, or whether you're getting it from some other source, you're going to have to download it one way or the other. So it's kind of a wash there. As far as the load on a FileMaker server, all I'm storing is that key and the credentials, right? I'm just generating that URL. There's really not much to store on the FileMaker side, and I'm getting all that directly from S3. And then, of course, I can say if I want to upload a new image. Let's pick one here. I can drag it into a container to kind of use as an in-between, just to get it from FileMaker and upload that to S3. And then I've got that image there. And I've got another layout here that shows me some more details on that object. And this is going to allow me to change some of those things I was talking about. So say I want to change a storage class to, from standard to infrequent access or something. Now there are some details when you do switch that. Say I switch it to infrequent access. Then there are some service limits that would also apply. So you want to be aware of those before you go just switching them, but those are there. it does support encryption at rest. So if I wanted to encrypt that object, I've got some options there. But yeah, the basic one is just you just say I want to encrypt it. Use the Amazon provided keys, and it will encrypt that object. And of course, I can copy that URL or generate that pre-signed URL and copy it if I need to. That's not such a good one to show, but I can show if I want to delete that, then it will remove it from this 3 bucket.
Mike, I have a question. This is Lynn.
Sure.
You were talking before about localizing your container data to a server in the region you're talking about, you're accessing it from. How much does that affect the performance if you spread your container data out over several of their localized servers?
I think it's just gonna depend on what the data is, but I think you would see a little bit more latency on the West Coast if you were accessing a bucket from the East Coast, but it's going to be more apparent. So there's regions like all around the world. So if I provision a bucket out in, say, Australia, I'll see a little bit more latency.
Does mirroring help East Coast, West Coast?
You could do that as well. Sure. I'm not sure if it, of course you have to break down the numbers, but that is something that you can enable on a bucket. You can enable cross-region replication. So maybe your main bucket's in North Virginia, but you want it replicated out to, say, an Oregon or Northern California region. And then depending on where your users are at, to reference the bucket from the appropriate place using the same credentials. That would work.
Mike, if you've got folks that have very large files, multiple megabytes or even gigabytes, obviously that upload or download is the download's just a web viewer, but the upload is going to be very dependent upon bandwidth and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. You don't always need to, I should have mentioned this showing that snow example, that you don't always need to pipe this through FileMaker to get it uploaded. In that example, it's like we knew the file path, so it was just a matter of getting that uploaded to S3 and then referencing it from a FileMaker database. So we didn't have to upload it from FileMaker necessarily.
Hey, Mike, I got another question. How does this factor in if you have a client? I mean, I have a client who has probably 200 or 300 gigabytes of images, but they're an auction house and they regularly print forms that show the images, and there may be 50, 60, 100. I mean, I've never tried putting that many web viewers on one page, but I mean, is that feasible? And is the image quality for printing or generating a PDF, is that actually feasible?
With web viewers, I think there's still that still exists as kind of a bug especially on Windows. It's not so much a bug on Mac, but it is on Windows. When you go to print a web viewer, it's going to print at like 96 DPI, or it's basically printing at screen resolution. So you would probably want to, bring those back down into a container field, at least temporarily. So
yeah, which I guess could potentially be problematic if they want to print 40 or 50 pages with and one image per item. So okay.
Yeah, depending on how many you want to print at one time, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, typically, they would, they'd print all the items for one auction, and that could be as many as 400, 500, 600 items.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, that's all stuff to consider.
Yeah. Thank you.
I guess there's no right answers, but So I did want to show, so this particular one, we've got this image up here, and it's like a water meter. But now I want to go and tap into some other services out on AWS. I can tell it to use a service called Recognition that's going to go back and detect the text out of here, and it does a pretty good job of it, and even like gives me labels. Labels are like what it thinks this is appearing in the object. It gives it a label, so it thinks that it's an electric device. And it also gives me a confidence score of the percentage of the confidence that it got what it says it got back out. So it's 100% confidence that it got this text, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So this is just one example of leveraging those other services with once your objects are up in S3, then it's kind of easy. You don't need to push that data out to S3 every time. You can just say, hey, it's already in a bucket. Here's the object. Go reference it from there. Run this action on it. So from there, if there's no other questions, I did have another example, and this is just another layout for the same database that just shows a couple other things from S3, and a couple things are so in this demo I've got just wanted to show off like a couple of these other AWS services. So it's not like a polished example, but I wanted to show you kind of the basic steps in my thinking here. So I had a recording from a different FileMaker meeting that I had, right? I just uploaded that, and I want to transcribe that, right? There's a service out there to transcribe it. So I just pointed to that, and this, it's actually big enough. I start a job, and then I pull that. This is kind of what I pre-baked, right? And get the results back so we don't have to wait on it. But it took maybe like 5 minutes to complete. And then I get that, I get the results back. And then I can parse that back into, it gives me that as a text file, right? And then I put that, I get that text file back up there. And so now I want to pipe that through a different service. I want to translate that. So it did a pretty good job. And if I look at the results of that transcribe, it actually breaks it down word by word and gives me that same kind of confidence score. So I could flag things where I thought it might have gotten it wrong, but it actually does a pretty good job. And now I want to take this text and translate it into. Anybody have a preference here? Spanish, English? I just take French, and there I get a result back. It translates the text. So say I want to go to Spanish, translate. So now I'll say I've got that Spanish out there. I've already translated it, and now I want to get that back as audio, right? So I've got the text translated back out, and now I've got some different options here. I can specify a certain voice. Anybody have a preference here? So I'll just make that one and say post that to Poly, and I get the result back as an MP3 file. Or say I want to pick a different, I'll just pick one at random here.
Mike, your volume needs to be higher for us to hear that.
Can you hear that?
Yes,
Okay, I
that's
don't know if
better.
you could hear that or not, but
T.
That was better.
so that's kind of the demos that I had. I did have one for there's a service called Textract, and of course it's got some different options here. I can analyze a document or detect the document text, right? And say I want to use that file directly from S3. This one actually has the option you can just upload it from container or just reference it from S3, and gives me back some nice like JSON results on that. So any questions on that or any of that? And of course, I'm kind of oversimplifying in some of these demos. Each one of these services has a lot of different options if you dig down into it. Like the transcribe actually has, you can upload your own like dictionary of terms. Say you've got jargon that's specific to a particular industry that you want to have it be aware of, that you can do that. And there's a bunch of different options for each of these, but this is just kind of a bare bones quick demo. I know I'm kind of oversimplifying certain things, but yeah, if there's any questions, then just let me know.
Your use case for this would seem to be clients who have heavy container data use, but not so much for smaller companies that don't, or smaller data loads, which would be better to keep in-house, right?
Yeah, very generally speaking, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm kind of biased, but I do think there are some advantages to, once you've got that data on the cloud that, or in S3 that, there are pros and cons either way.
Mike, are you aware of any medical dictionaries for transcribing? Has that happened yet, or?
I haven't. That hasn't popped up for me yet. But I did want to show one thing. I did want to show if I want to send an HTML email referencing that image. So I built just like a simple little thing. This actually sends through AWS as well. But if I want to look at the source code for that, so all I did was I generated that pre-signed URL, and I'm using that in the HTML to build that and show it here. So this kind of makes it real easy to do things like that. It makes it easy to share your data. So even if you did have like a smaller use case, there might be reasons that we would want to look at this.
Mike, I have a question about the snow service. That's great because you can send it up to the S3 through this physical volume. Then what's involved in having FileMaker index all of that, and how long did that take?
So we actually had like just a file listing in a database, right? With it had the file names that we had. So when we uploaded it to S3, we uploaded it to a specific bucket, and that just becomes part of the URL or the path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're just able to calculate it based on what you sent. You knew the file names. Thank you.
Doug Hogue had a question. Could the lock feature be used for ransomware protection?
Could the lock feature be used for ransomware protection? That I don't know that the lock features specifically. Yeah, it could. You wouldn't necessarily need to lock on it, but you could enable, say, even like multi-factor authentication to be able to delete an object, right? Where you're not able to change it directly, but there might be other options to insulate you from that. That is something that did come up, that that there's a little bit of an air gap between wherever your FileMaker server is. So say your FileMaker server is compromised, that wouldn't necessarily extend to your objects in S3.
Are you aware of any AWS server that's been hit by ransomware?
There has been. I mean, that usually comes down to just best practices in managing your server. I think there was a different FileMaker host that got hit within the past month or so.
AAA.
With ransomware
Yeah,
attack.
AAA got it. I
Mhm.
have a client with them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always kind of I don't want to say like anybody's completely invulnerable to that, but I do think that the way that we handle backups, it does provide maybe like an air gap between, because we don't store backups directly on volumes where it might be susceptible to that. We rely a lot on taking snapshots, so those wouldn't be online for, if you did have a server compromised, you wouldn't be able to access those snapshots. But yeah, I know security is kind of an ongoing, right? It's like a game of whack-a-mole. He's trying to stay one step ahead. But that's where, trying to stay up to date and adhere to best practices really comes in handy.
Okay.
Mike, will you be uploading this file to the Soliant site, or?
If you want like a copy of this, I can make it available. I would say just reach out to me. I don't have it generally available.
No, you have to strip the personal information out of the file. That's kind of a job in itself. I'm just curious.
Yeah, and there's a variety of methods used here that wouldn't necessarily be accessible either. That was kind of what I was alluding to also, in terms of storing credentials and how you do that, whether you're accessing it from a role or utilizing a different. So some of these actually I didn't roll all into, or I didn't roll my own AWS API implementation directly in FileMaker. I'm actually hitting a different service where I'm using a supported SDK, and trust me, it's a lot easier to do that than to try and rewrite all the AWS API directly in FileMaker to generate everything needed. And the SDKs are quite a bit better documented and easier to use. So that is some ongoing discussion as far as best practices, and I'm working with a couple colleagues to try and make that easier. But this one does use a couple different examples, and there's several out there that generate the required headers to work with some of these services.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Mike?
I'm just curious about examples of SDKs that you might mention.
The one I've used most is the PHP Sdk, right? Which I can show an example of that. So, like for let's pick one. It's like working with the translate one, then these are kind of freely available, right? If you're familiar with PHP, then you can put together some PHP code, right, that just passes that parameter from FileMaker, makes the call, right, and it handles all that, generating the AWS signature and talking to the AWS APIs and handing you back a result. So that's what I mean. Like these are a lot better documented and fairly easy to use. And I'm not storing any keys in here. The way I'm doing it in here is I'm just passing those in an HTTPS URL through FileMaker. So that's how this is working. But you could also have that, say your PHP server was hosted in AWS. You could just assign the permissions to that server that's running on, and that's really kind of where then you start getting into best practice of like, okay, that server's got this permissions. It doesn't have a key or secret. You're not passing credentials at all, right? It's just inheriting that from its role as it's assigned in AWS and allowed to do what it's going to be able to do. So I wrote this in PHP because I know that. I know a couple of my colleagues are working on some serverless architecture to be able to do similar things with this kind of thought in mind, to make it easier for FileMaker and also adhere to best practice. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay, anybody else?
This is Alexia. I had a question. It's a little bit of an aside, but I was just wondering if you or anyone knows if that web viewer bug is still an issue with the latest version of FileMaker, which has changed up the now using Edge or whatever for the Windows web viewer.
I don't know that it would be, because I'm not using. You mean when you're using it as an interactive container? I think that was the bug, right? Viewing PDS as an interactive container.
Yeah, and I thought you also said that there was a printing bug.
Oh, the printing issue on Windows, that's been around for several versions. So I don't know if anybody here has run into that. Like if I have a web viewer on a Mac and I print, it prints fine. It prints it. Whether if say your printer is printing at 300 DPI, it's going to print at 300 DPI. But if you're printing on Windows, then this web viewer, the printout, it looks fuzzy. And it looks fuzzy because it's printing at like screen resolution, which on Windows is what, 96 DPI?
Yep.
But I guess to answer your question, I haven't specifically tested with 19.3 on Windows, but I can't think of why it wouldn't work. It's just a URL in a web viewer, but I could test that, sure.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, Mike, for
Yep, thanks.
showing us all that highly technical stuff. And Christian, are you available?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, are you ready?
So let me.
I'm gonna make you co-host. Well, I would if I. So you can share your screen. Christian is going to show us a few of the 40 new functions that's going to be released next week.
Yes. My sound working? Yeah. So it's nice to see this AWS stuff, because for our next plugin version, there's also a function coming for pre-signed URLs, because some clients asked for that. You may really store some pictures in Amazon S3, and we also have an example for uploading that. And then you can make a pre-signed URL to, for example, load it in a HTML viewer. And for that, you don't need a login. But for today, I wanted to show you something about storing custom functions in a database. So at .fmp last month, we had this idea on the first day that we could do calculations, and instead of putting them in the custom functions dialog here, we would put them in a database. Then we could have different versions in the database and load them into memory with the MBS plugin and then call them anywhere. That means you have them in one file and you can just use them in all your files as long as FileMaker is open. And in your start script, you can just load the functions you like. So here's an example. We have a function named concat. It takes 2 parameters, and the number of parameters is actually variable. So you can define as many as you want, and you don't need to fill them all when you call the function. We have here some example values. This is a calculation of my little function here. And we can use our usually syntax colorizing on Mac to colorize it. And you see here, I get red brackets. We can also do a syntax check. And here see that I have something wrong. And then we can run the function and see the result here. Okay, we have a few more examples, like here some math to square a number. We can use FileMaker functions here in this, our own custom functions. We can use Json functions, of course, to work with Json. And we can call other custom functions we defined using the plugin again. So we call our FileMaker custom function here. We provide the name of our namespace. In this case, we use CF for the example, the function name, which can be calculated, and then the values to pass. And those values are passed as in the format they are. So this works with containers and works with dates, times. Yeah. And we have a special variable names for the current function name and for the dictionary. So you can know your function name in the function, and this can be useful because if you want to do some recursion, you can actually know which dictionary you are stored in and which function name you are. And if you like to know how this is set up, I can show you the start script. There we create a named dictionary, so we don't need to remember an identifier. We know it's always CF here in this example. And we have a loop here over the records to register the functions. And each function registration is just putting the custom function code into a dictionary with the name, the body, and we have 3 slash notation for the names of the parameters. So you may have a file with all your self-defined custom functions here. You may just trigger the start script from all your files, and here we have a little check to make sure it's only initialized once. And then you can use those functions everywhere in all your files on client and server. Any questions on that?
So you're basically storing your function, your custom functions in the plugin. And it's a plug.
They are stored in the memory managed by the plugin.
Cool.
It's awesome.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
that's something you can try and give me feedback, please. I may also point out that if you have to write a custom function here, you may use our little extras here. Let me just define a little function. You may have noticed that we increased the font size and we colorize it, but we also got this nice here execute result. So I can check the syntax here, right, without closing the dialog. And I can actually define a test case. So I can define this is hello and this is get account name. So I can define test values for my custom function here and execute it right in the window.
I'll be darned.
Okay, and of course you can play with that. You can have other values. The plugin takes the last declaration, so you can turn things on and off by just changing them. And as we use here 2 slashes, it's a command for FileMaker, so FileMaker will ignore it, and the plugin will use that. Any question on that?
No, that's pretty cool.
It's Mac only. I'm sorry to tell you, but like all our enhancements. But our custom functions here work even on Windows. And if you like to use JavaScript, you can also do custom functions in JavaScript.
Mm.
So we got this js.cf function to call a function in JavaScript anywhere. You pass in the function name, which can be calculated again. So you can pick it from a pop-up menu maybe. You can pass parameters as many as you want, and we convert your numbers to JavaScript numbers and everything else to text. So you don't have trouble if you call something with decimal separators. So let me just try this function, hello world. You see we have the function name here. We have parameters with example value, and this is the JavaScript calculation. Here's an example for squaring a number, and this is a good chance to show you data viewer. You see in the data viewer, we also have here the execute and check example, so you can use that anywhere, even when you define a calculated field. I can just put in here a number 5, or I have a comma for the decimal separator, and this is passed as a number, and the result is a number. So it will automatically use a dot or comma depending on your localization. Then here's an example of using array functions in JavaScript. So if you have some JavaScript snippet to do some text manipulation, and in JavaScript, sometimes it's faster in JavaScript, sometimes faster in FileMaker. So you may use array functions in JavaScript to do something. You may also use JSON functions in JavaScript to, well, work on some JSON. And we have here an example which calls one custom function from another. So we can use our JavaScript functions to define any function in JavaScript and just call it here. Hello, hello. Yeah. And to show you how it works, let's go in the start script where you see that we create a JavaScript environment named JS, and that's the one which is automatically referenced here by our custom functions. And then we again loop over the records to register each function, which builds here a JavaScript function with the parameters you define and the actually body of your function. So this is just a script again, which you just copy, or you just use this file, and on start of your solution, you would run the start script to register the JavaScript environment once. You may also put you may use our other functions like here for JavaScript. So you may, for example, use here set global value, so you can define global variables in JavaScript. And for example, pass here something like a 5 megabyte JSON block to define a global array. And then work on that. And you may also use functions like here, this one, to define a JavaScript function which can call back to FileMaker and then allow you in JavaScript to evaluate things like access the get functions or the fields on the current layout. You can put the field name here and evaluate that and you get the value. Same for executing SQL or triggering a script. Yeah. Any questions on that?
Christian, you said you were going to be releasing these next week.
Yeah, we are finishing up our release and it should be available next week, maybe Monday, Tuesday, we'll see. So 11.3 is coming and we have a couple of new functions listed here.
Just a couple.
Including an upgrade to our barcode detection and to our text recognition with a new engine, new Textract engine. But I think the most useful for most people will be the custom functions or the JavaScript custom functions. So.
Well, thank you very much for that preview. Looks fascinating. Have you ever encountered anyone who's used all the functions?
No. Usually people use a handful and because everyone uses a different set of functions, it's all different. So basically you buy the plugin for the first function and then the rest is free.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Christian.
Welcome.
I think that we're going to go into announcements and I have some polls I want people to answer. And then we'll go into breakout rooms and then we'll have Alexi and her case studies. So Bob Shockey had an announcement.
Yes, I just wanted to let everybody know that I've got next month's meeting for August. And I'm gathering ideas and presenters for that meeting. So if you have something you'd like to talk about, something you'd like to show, whether it's just a little tip and trick or a full-on case study or anything in between, let me know and we'll talk it over. You know, even if you've never presented before, you know, we love first-time presenters, and I and the others on the board will coach you and help you get over whatever hurdles you may be facing if you're not used to doing that kind of speaking. And we'd love to see what you got. Always looking for new content. And looks like
Yeah, sorry for that. I'm going to put some polls into the room here. I'll let each one remain for a minute or so. So they're just a series of 4. They're very okay, Christy. I'm sorry.
Good first question from Lynn there. A well-formed question, if you ask me.
There are so many advantages to the Zoom meetings.
Do you guys know how I can get away with the co-moderation?
Get away with what?
I'm still moderator.
Oh, I think Lynn has to change it.
Thank you.
Then you're still muted if you're trying to.
Yeah, Lynn, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. I'm do the next poll here.
So I've just got to say, I do actually feel ready for in-person meetings because Chicago's COVID rates are delightfully low. However, I'm not ready for you guys to go back to in-person meetings because then I can't come.
Well,
That's why I didn't vote. I didn't feel like I was qualified being in San Francisco to weigh in.
well, I think everybody's available to vote, especially those people who are remote, because
Are you guys going to do hybrid or?
Well, that's one of the reasons why Jonathan was talking about, you know, the logistics of doing meetings on Zoom makes sense. We get farther reach, we get better recordings, we don't have to set up a complex room and so forth. So that's part of, you know, what we were talking about as the board is, number one, let's continue to do our meetings that give us this wide audience and great reach. But number two, we like to get together, and the learning and the being together don't have to happen at the same time, which is why we've sort of talked about maybe let's get together, if for the people in the area, let's get together and see each other and socialize, and let's continue our meetings the way they've been recently, because again, we've got so many advantages to being able to deliver these much easier than the on-site ones at Rto were.
Yeah, so we're not talking about just going back to how things were before. Like many things, we're figuring out what the future holds, and you know how to take advantage of some of the great things that have come up, and then also get back some of the things that, you know, frankly, we lose by just being only virtual. So.
yeah, we've been considering how would the tech part of the meetings, you know, are we going to have a camera set up? Are we going to set up a computer with a Zoom host or something? And how would we share the in-person part of the meeting with the online part of the meeting? So
well, that's if we're doing content in an actual meeting. If we're just doing a social get together, I don't think anybody wants to watch that.
No. I mean, if we have technical content at our meetings, that we would go back to something similar to what we had to at Brzee. And we have not yet contacted Brzee on whether they are open to having hordes of strangers come onto their property. So
yeah, I think we're sort of feeling our way through it.
right. So I had 4 polls. It'll only let me run the one. So I guess if there's any more feedback of what people would like to participate in, I mean, those of you who are local, how much do you want to get together?
Lynn, it would just seem that the Zoom meetings would continue in much the way we did Burbank a year or 2 ago. That would be the in-person, just because setting up the logistics of going to Brzee locally and setting up a camera, it could work for Zoom attendees, but a much easier answer would seem to be meetings over Zoom, but the occasional Burbank sports bar that we did, that sort of scenario.
Yeah, that took a lot of logistics and was very expensive. So we're looking to do things that are much lower impact than that. Like, hey, we're going to be at this park or this whatever on Saturday morning, and anybody who wants to show up can, and bring your own coffee, and you know, maybe someone will pick up some bagels, kind of thing. So a much more casual event than what we did in Burbank, which, you know, took, like I said, took a lot of planning and money, and Dave sort of sponsored a lot of that, which was very nice of him. But yeah, what we're talking about is just a much more casual kind of like, hey, we're going to be getting it together here on this date and time. Come if you can make it, kind of thing.
Okay, at this time, are there any more announcements?
It won't let you do another poll? That seems very odd.
It's only letting me show this one. And I built 4 and I don't know why it's not letting me put it into the room. So
I am.
okay. We're all here because Alexi was very close to the vest on which case study she would be showing us. So it's going to be a surprise to all of us, and I'm looking forward to it. So Alexi Folger, former Claris / FileMaker Inc. sales engineer or senior engineer, and now an independent consultant like the rest of us. So take it away, Alexi.
All right. Well, first of all, I'll just say it's super awesome to be here. I confess I may kind of have OD'd on presentations in my previous job, but now it's like I almost never have to do them. So this is sort of a treat. And let me get to my slides. Can you guys all see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, so the title credit for this presentation goes to Lynn. And these are both, so this is me. I do work with Beeswax, which I love. My own company, Outside Edge Consulting. The name is a nod to my away from computer passion of figure skating. And if anyone wants to contact me, that's that. So I don't know, you know, when I worked for FileMaker, we always had to do the who am I slide. So here it is. The second bullet gives away my age, but I did work at MIT many moons ago. And I was an accidental FileMaker pioneer there. And I ended up founding the FileMaker user group, which leads to the next bullet that led to a job at what I call Claris 1.0. And that was Claris before it was Claris International. When Claris got renamed FileMaker, I went off to the mothership for a few years at Apple. And I escaped the vortex for all of about 3 months. And then I came back to FileMaker Inc. and worked as a senior systems engineer for about 12 and a half years. And some of the highlights of that work experience was the chance to go to FMDiSC meetings in person, both as a guest and as a presenter. So it's super fun to be back here. And who knows, I haven't been in an airplane in 16 months, so maybe I'll get on one and come join you for one of your picnics. I'm in San Francisco for anyone who doesn't know, so not too far from LA. So my case studies, so they are both very real world situations where I had to basically implement what I consider imperfect solutions. So part of this is a chance for you guys to tell me what's wrong with both of these. The first one is sorting, you know, the columns in portals, which seems like an ancient, you know, problem / request. And I was a little surprised at how little I found. You know, I'm like, well, there's got to be like new fancy whiz bang ways of doing this. And I did various searches, you know, in community resources, and came up with these 3 things, which were mostly all people doing similar things. Like people took Tom Fitch's calculation and did some extra things with them. I'm happy to share these slides for those of you who want to go to any of these URLs. But none of them quite did the trick. The one I spent the most time looking at was the one from Soliant, which was I think this one here. And the nice thing about their sample file is that it also does this batch update thing, but I didn't need that. And I couldn't easily get the portal sorting part of it to work. So I ditched that. And rolled my own. Also, yeah, that one is based on like a single master record. And of course, I'm trying to retrofit this onto an existing client solution. So speaking of which, this is a solution I inherited. I believe Lynn put my description of the high carbohydrate, which is to say big pile of spaghetti that this database is. So an example, which is what you're going to see when I do the sorting, is like there's portals everywhere. This one layout has 10 of them. It also has some data which really should be in portals and isn't. And just to prove to you, I couldn't resist this. I stumbled upon this in this file one day, and I literally laughed out loud. And yeah, thank you. Literally, I like almost fell out of my chair, and I'm like, well, okay, that's the developer mindset I'm inheriting here. Was that. So let me actually switch over to so like I said, it's not pretty. This database is very complex. It's been in production since like 2007. So it's got lots of stuff that's been added over time. In this particular case, I'm looking at the projects view, and you can see all of these tabs, and you can see that there are like literally one of these tabs has 2 portals. There are 10 portals, and the client has started asking for being able to sort, these columns, and I anticipate they're going to ask for it in more than one location. So right now it's actually on these 2 tabs, which are 2 that I had to add to this pile of spaghetti. And you think it's a simple thing, right? So I click on the type, and it sorts, and also turns bold. So like I said, the solutions that I could find, which most of them had custom functions, which I don't have anything against, but I was trying to do something quick and dirty, so I did. So there's basically one script, and it does have parameters. I'm going to go through the script in some detail. One of the important things to note is that the parameter just uses the list function, and the 2 values that you need to have are the field you're sorting by, and in this case, since there's so many portals, the portal which has an object name on it. And I kind of put the script into slides, so hopefully it's like big enough for you guys to see. Someone can tell me if that's not the case, and I can.
Looks great.
Okay,
Yeah, it's fine.
Awesome. Like you'll notice my recent addition of reading glasses here, so I sympathize. So basically, what I'm doing here is I'm just capturing the portal and the field to be sorted. The nice thing about this is it's very extensible, because you can just name as many portals and as many fields as you want or need, and still just use the same script. And so again, this is right now I'm only sorting on the 2 portals, but the whole idea here is that you can just do a go to related record for as many portals as you have. So the quick overview is I'm basically, and it seems clunky, but it's pretty fast, and the user doesn't see any of it, is I'm going to a layout, based on the child records, and I'm sorting. So that's why I have one for each portal, because it's going to a different table and sorting a different group of records. And then this is the part where it gets a little bit interesting. I have these target utility layouts, and this is where some of the sort of drudgery comes in. that you have to have an object name corresponding to the script parameters. And I'll show you that. I'll switch back to the database in a second. But basically, you go to the object and you're getting the sort field from the script parameter. And then you're sorting.
Hey, Alexi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but real quick, how
Yeah.
does this not cause user collisions fighting against each other on sort order?
Yeah, that's a good question. And all of the solutions I found seemed to have that problem, because they all, involve some kind of a calculation to make a field that tells you how to sort. And in this case, I've put in a couple of guardrails to try to, like, it's not elegant, but it sort of warns the user. But the other thing is that the portal itself doesn't, maybe this is sort of a good thing, is that it doesn't seem to refresh very actively. And so in my use case, for as long as the users are on the tab, unless they leave and come back, sometimes their sort order will be gone if someone else has sorted it. But while they're looking at it, it doesn't spontaneously resort.
I had a comment, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
An interpreted, I'm sorry, I took over someone else's project and somebody did a nice job over the past 10 years. They have a session record for each user and they put those sorting information in their record.
Yeah, that's a great solution. And we actually just finished retrofitting this solution with a user table, which it never had before. And I did that after this portal sorting exercise, but now that it's there, that is a great suggestion. I did it for security reasons, for account creation management type stuff, but that would be a great side benefit. So let me go. Yeah. So the interesting little magic here that's kind of buried in my script comments, which, by the way, I will say none of them were added for this presentation. So I'm very proud of myself for all my script commenting, because it made putting this presentation together so much simpler. So the interesting thing is that if you do sort records by field, as opposed to just sort, right, when you choose, it will, where the regular sort script step, you have to identify the field that you want. But sort records by field will sort by the active field if no field is designated in the step, right? So the way I solve that is I have the parameter that tells me the field, and then I've named each field on the utility layout, has the object name that matches that. So I go to that object, that's the active field, and then it sorts. So, so these steps work for every field of every portal, just as long as the object name matches. Which, as my notes say, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? But that's the way that script step works, because that's kind of the secret sauce behind this. So again, just to, and again, I'll show you this on the layout just to make it very obvious. So the field itself is on the utility layout, which the user never sees, of course, and it has to have the name that matches the field. So typos count, don't do that. Let me just go here and show you. Let's have to get my Zoom window out of the way. So, this is the utility layout, and it's just each one of these fields, each one that you want to sort has to be on the layout, has to have an object name, and then the script.
So
work.
Everything looks good on the printer.
Is someone talking to me? Oh, sorry, I thought someone was asking a question. All right, I will just keep going. So back to the slides. So there is a ZZ portal sort field, which is just a straight up number field. And that's the one that gets replaced. And again, this is extensible, you know, because you just need an else if for each portal that you might want to sort. So my two portals are freight costs and COL costs, and each one of those tables has a ZZ portal sort field in it. And then after, you know, the records are sorted, right? So I go to the utility table, I sort based on the field, then I replace with a serial number. So then that field, the ZZ portal sort field, is in a numerical order that corresponds to the sorted order that I'm looking for. And then all I have to do is sort the portal itself by that utility field. And then the last part of the script, you know, because it started with a freeze window, went off, did all of that nonsense, and then comes back. And in this case, I'm like going back to the object because there's so many portals, and going to the portal row and doing a commit and a refresh to get to force the sort to happen. And because through the developer, actually here, I'll get to that in a second. So a couple of caveats, the biggest one, and this seemed to apply even to the Soliant and the Fitch solutions. Like if you have like a gazillion child records, you really don't have a business having a portal in the first place, probably. And so, you know, like in the spirit of the IRS forms where it says, if this is less than this, then you stop and you skip these lines. Well, you just need to skip the whole portal altogether and probably, you know, go to layouts based on the child table. But, you know, that's kind of really true of almost anything you would want a portal for, in my opinion. So I don't think it's a huge drawback in this particular case. And it certainly works for my use case because there aren't, you know, thousands of child records, you know, per parent, right? Like you can have lots and lots of records in there. Like if you have a gazillion projects, you might have, you know, 2 gazillion child records, but that's just going to be, you know, 2 per project. So that doesn't matter. It's the number of records per parent that really matters in this case. And because I threw the previous developer of this solution under the bus, I'm throwing myself under the bus. I'm so proud of all my comments. And here's one I wrote to myself that I found still lingering in the script. And I'm like, oh yes, I have it to do. So, so, you know, that part is pretty easy to do, but it wasn't really within the scope of what the user cared about that much.
Oh, Lexi, we have a question from Gary Davis. Is ZZ_portal_sort a global?
Excellent question. No, it's not. It's just an indexed number field that gets replaced every time the user does a sort. So it has real data in it, but it's not data that you care about. So, let me show you. So here's the ZZ portal sort field. So like if I go into browse mode now, most of the records have never been sorted because it depends on which project you're on, which, you know, it goes to the related records, right? So that's part of what saves it. Like I said, even if you have tons of parents, if you only have a certain number of children per parent, it's going to related records. So it's only sorting the records for that parent. And then it's it's putting a number in there. So like if I sort this by sort, oops, oh, I need to go the other way. There you go. So like the records for the ones I sort are down there. So it's a straight up number field. It is indexed because it's part of, actually, no, in this case, it doesn't need to be indexed. Sorry, that's my other solution. It's just a straight up number field. The, go back to the slides here. So it's this step, this part of the script here. So the first part is just telling you which field to replace. You'll see in both cases, I've named the field ZZ portal sort everywhere just so I don't get confused as to what's what. That's my utility field. It has to exist in each child table, you know, that you have a portal that you want to sort. And as you see, it's doing a replace with serial numbers. So it gets continuously, you know, overridden if you add records and resort and so forth. So does that answer the question, hopefully?
I believe so. I have a question. I don't normally name all of my objects on a layout, only the ones that are necessary. So how much overhead does this add in having to object name everything?
Actually, you know, that's a great question. And you technically you don't. You only need to name, so
the sortable fields. Yeah, I get it.
Right. So like, for instance, in this case, I'm actually right now, I'm only even sorting on this portal and this portal. So like all of these other portals, which are ones I inherited, they don't even have names. This one does because it for some other reason, but there's lots of them that have no name at all. So you only need to name the portals that you're going to want to sort on. And then on the utility, the matching utility layouts, you only need to name the fields you want to sort by. So for instance, I'm not sorting by the primary key ever, so that one doesn't have a name. So it does mean that like when you do a spec with a client, you know, you should be very clear, because there is just, and that's the drudgery work, is just like naming things, like, you know, figuring out the logic of the scripts and the workflow was the hard part, and sitting here and naming things was the boring part. My note says your brain can go off and do something else. It doesn't really need to be exerted to do that part. But I would recommend that you spec it out very specifically with your client, because there's certain things they probably will never care about. And then there's no reason to waste your time naming it and keeping track of what the name of it is and so forth. So good question.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
A bit of a comment, Alexia. I'm a big fan of the object name technique that you're using, and you know, what I'd say is that there's a little bit of overhead in terms of adding text to, you know, object names to layout fields. So you pay a little cost there, but your script becomes what I call a black box script.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's more on the layout, but there's less in the script. And the fact that it's a black box script means that when you want to add to it, you only have to go into one zone. You only go to the layout and you're done. You know, you're not like, oh, I got to do this on the script and this on the layout. So I'm a huge fan of the object name and the two different functions, sort by field name, the one you're using,
yep.
And also there's like a find on name or something like that. Anyway, so I like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because that's why like these steps, like it's so simple, right? And to your point, it doesn't really matter how many things you ever want to sort by this part of the script. You never even
you don't have to touch it.
Yeah, you don't touch it at all. So thank you for that. But yeah, that's kind of what made all of this happen. The script itself is really relatively simple. I mean, I divided it up onto all of these slides so that you could read it. And I left in all of my script commentary so that you could see that. But the script itself is really, really pretty simple. All right, so I think we have gotten to the end of that, and we can move on, unless there's other questions, but.
Alexia, I just wanted to mention Matt, the FileMaker magazine guy, I forget the last name. He names every single, I'm sorry?
Petrowski, who I think is on this or was on.
No, isn't he he's Washington? The other Matt. He names every single object on every single layout. I was freaked when he said that in a presentation at DEF CON. Just want to drop that in there.
That's interesting. He's got more patience than I do, but he probably has a good reason. I guess the name is there if you need it for anything, but maybe he's just less lazy than I am. But interesting point.
There's one more approach to this that maintains user separation for different sort orders, which is to have a global field that defines what the sort order should be, and then unstored calcs in each record that refer to that global field. So I can sort it by first name, you can sort it by last name. Of course, there's a hit there with unstored calculations.
Yeah.
But if separate order per user is critical, that's another approach to go about.
Actually, yeah, and thank you for that. I totally forgot to mention, because the blind alleys that I went down, this particular mound of spaghetti is primarily used by people just south of here on a very nice server that's hosted in Las Vegas. But it's also used by people in their company in the Philippines and in China. And the performance there is just glacial. I really have no idea how those users even tolerate most of the other functionality in this database. And that I just wasn't willing to. I tried it a little and I asked them to test it, and they're so used to the horrible functionality, but I just couldn't take it. So
well, Bob Gossam mentioned that he does pseudo portal sorting with tabs. A tab object with a different portal. I mean, there's obvious downsides maintaining all those multiple portals. And if you have a lot of child records, it could slow down the screen draw every time you change to a different tab. So.
Yeah, it's a valid approach, but again, that also has some limitations. I believe one of the ones on the one of the versions I found out there in the community discusses that one. So if you go, if you have any interest in these slides, I'm happy to give them to you, and it has the URLs for the other approaches that I found out there in the community, which all have some merit. So, and one of them mentions that tab use. So.
You could have if you're having the slowest thing would be the replace steps, and you could always offload that to perform that little bit on server,
Yeah, that's an interesting, and we're gonna get to an instance of that in my next case study where I did do that and got even better performance. And I did the second one after the first one, and then I thought, oh, I should go back and do that for the first one. So I haven't done that yet, but it's a great idea. And you'll see why in a second with my okay, so I will move on to case study number 2. So this first bullet is really because, like, when I explained it to Lynn as a dashboard, I thought, oh, I'm going to get crucified because, the user, that's what they wanted to call it. So I'm like, great, it's their workflow dashboard, but it's not what you would think of as like your typical visual dashboard that gives you graphs and charts and maybe does fancy stuff with, JSON blobs of data. In this case, actually, the last line here of the use case constraints was the most important, which is that they actually need to work with individual record data. And hence I have a whole dashboard full of portals. The other two limitations are ones that have never happened to any of you, I'm sure, which was that they were really desperate for some quick turnaround. And of course, they had a limited amount of my time they wanted to spend on it in terms of budget. So here's what I came up with. So the system is a project management system, and projects are at various stages or phases of completion. And there are really 4 that were of most importance to the client. And the first is like new or unassigned requests, because they have a whole group of users that come in and put in requests, and then they have to be approved and assigned. The projects are from the art department for a kind of well-known celebrity Vineyard, who will remain nameless. And so the next step, it's all about the artwork. It's also an asset management system because they store the proofs of all of the artwork. So the next category is it's been assigned, but no designer hasn't yet added a proof to the system. And then the next is the designer has put in a proof, but the person, the project initiator requester has not approved or rejected it. And then the last is once they've kind of worked out and they know exactly what they want, they ship it out to companies to do printing or production or whatever, and they need bids and a winning bid for that. So again, this one is kind of scalable to as many categories as you want to have, but those are the ones that that my user has. So let's go take a look. So first of all, let me get rid of interface. No, I'm not going to say changes. So this is the winery projects database. It defaults to coming into a list view. So the main problem is that this view is just too overwhelming for the project managers, too many projects, and this view doesn't really say what state they're in, which means, who has to be paying attention to what. And so the dashboard, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to scroll around a little to show this to you on my small laptop screen, but you can see there's a portal for each of the phases that I just explained, the unassigned projects, the one where a proof is needed, the ones where the request for approval is needed, and then the last one where the bids are needed. And then each one has, a selection of the information that's most important for the project managers to see. So one thing this revealed was that their data needed a lot of work because, as you can see, there are lots of things where old projects that weren't properly closed out that were showing up in the portal. So they've been using it as an occasion to clean up their act. But it also really helps the project manager sort of tame the madness and figure out where things are and what they need to be focused on. So there's a bunch of, the first one, the upper left, this unassigned one, is by far the simplest one. So each of them has a Z constant field, which is just a calc that resolved to the number 1. And then we have an unassigned status. So if I show you that, so there's a Cartesian join, right, on the first one, the 1 equals 1, so you get all the records there. And then the Z assigned status, which again is going to be 1 or 0, right, which is why it gets to match the constant on for both of the relationship criteria. And so this one is, if it has assigned to as a field, right? So if that's empty and the status of the project isn't canceled, then you get a 1 and then you get a match. Pretty simple. And then the other, the other relationships are basically all the same. It's just the utility field that gets more interesting. So still it's Z constant. Again, these are all self joins, right? So that Z constant field is just one field in one table. And then these other utility fields are the ones that change for each portal. And so in this, like you'll see, the first one was a Z assigned status. This one is Z no proof sent. And so it's the same thing, right? We have a Cartesian on the Z constant and equals on whichever the utility field is. And then where it gets interesting, so that is an indexed number field, but again, it's just a utility field that gets set to 1 or a 0 at runtime, which is basically when the user goes to the dashboard. So how does that happen? So you do need some scripts to make this happen. So I have an on layout entered trigger. And all it does is, and this is, Lynn, to your point, so it runs a perform script on server and it refreshes the window. And the PSOS is definitely what makes the performance really quite tolerable. And even that script is deceptively simple. So I go off to a utility layout and I show all the records and then I do a replace. So kind of similar to the other one. And again, this is extensible. As you can see, I have 3 of them because I have the 3 portals that need that field, the utility field, set at runtime. But you could do this for as many portals as you had. I mean, you know, if you had, I mean, it wouldn't be a very useful dashboard if you had hundreds of portals on that layout and you had to do hundreds of replaces. Your performance would probably go down even with script on server. But with my 4, it works very well. So the secret sauce is that all of the complexity, such as it is in the calculation of the replace field contents, right? So they're all replaced with a calculated value. And one thing that made this nice, you know, you talk about not having to change too many things. It's like, basically this was every time the client changed their mind about what the criteria was for which projects should be showing up in which phase, basically all I had to go and do was adjust the calculation logic for that one piece. And so here they are, just to give you a sense. And again, the whole idea is that this is going to resolve to 1 when it's something that should show up in the portal, and resolve to 0 that different, you know. And, you know, using case, very simple, I can have as many parameters, like they realize that they wanted to have both. There's a design status and a production status in this particular case, and they want to exclude ones that are complete or canceled in both of those. And then, like, if there's been a date for when the proof is due, but the is valid is just my way of testing for a related record. So here's a project request. There's been a first proof due date assigned, but there are no related records in the proof table, and hence a proof is needed. Feel free to stop me if I'm too deep in the weeds or if you want more of an explanation. But, you know, the real takeaway is that whatever logic you can encapsulate into your calculation is basically what's going to drive what shows up in the various portals on your dashboard. That was probably the most complex. And again, like for the requester approval needed, make sure it's not canceled. And the proof type and status that, you know, again, it gets into the weeds, but there are proofs that need to be reviewed by requesters, and then there are vendor proofs which don't, and that middle thing takes care of that. And then the approved status is whether or not the requester, if they've approved it, then that approved status would be a 1, and so those would be excluded. So basically, you know, if the project's not canceled, there's a proof of the type that needs to be reviewed, and there's no approval of it, then it falls into that category. And similarly, bids needed. Like they went back and forth on this, do they require printing or not? So it was a simple fix to the calculation, and that's all I had to do to add that when they changed their mind. So let's go back to the database and I'll just show you a little bit of this. So as I said, the main reason for doing all of this was that then the project managers want to be able to go to a particular project, right? So hence the portals with all of the individual records. Here's the detail for this particular one. And they can go back to the dashboard. And for that was really the last part. And this is just done with a field button on that job number field. Super simple. And again, this is extensible for as many portals as you have. You just need a script parameter on the button so it knows which portal you're looking at. And it sets, because you'll notice it's setting, it's getting the primary key of that record, right? And so it needs to know which portal to get the primary key from. And so that's why it needs a script variable. But again, oops, sorry. You just have as many else ifs as you need to accommodate the number of portals that you have. And so you do have to edit the script to do that, but it's like 3 steps for each portal. Or I should say it's 1 else if and 1 set variable, and that's really it. And again, then the button on the portal, just, they all run the same script. They just have the script parameter. And that script is so easy. It just goes to find mode, sets the field, and performs the find on the item overview layout. That may have been the simplest script I've ever written. And so one interesting caveat is that initially loading the dashboard, like not even scrolling the portals or anything, but just loading that layout was taking forever over the WAN if I just did a go to layout step. And it's a full-on hack, I acknowledge that, but it worked. Was I just went to find mode, and then I go to the layout, and then I go to browse mode, and then it's virtually instantaneous. Just one of those sort of crazy FileMaker workarounds that have been around in various forms probably forever. And it worked, and that's it. Let's just see if there's anything over here. Yeah, like I said, this is all very straightforward. So the layout, it has the 1 script trigger, and that all that script does is run the perform script on server and then refresh. So basically every time they get to this layout, they get a fresh set of records that meet the given criteria, which even means if they run off to look at an individual record and somebody updates a status while they're doing that, when they come back here again, it's always refreshed by virtue of doing the layout load script trigger. Questions, comments?
Hey, Alexi, how do you get the layout load trigger to run if they're using multiple windows and come back to this?
That's interesting. So in theory, that would be possible. the navigation buttons that, you know, I sort of restrict them to using, don't support multiple windows for this. Like every time you go to the list, it does it in this window, and when you go from there, it doesn't open a new window. But that's an excellent point, and I think you'd have to, like, I would open the dashboard with a layout name, and then I would check to see if there was a window with that layout name. And
well, it's easy to you know, check for the layout name and make sure that you know, the window exists and go to it if it exists, or create it if it doesn't. The question is, if it does exist and all they're doing is bringing it to the front, they're not necessarily getting a refresh when they arrive there.
right. You know, no, that is true. So if they know enough, like I'm in here, I have full access, of course. So so like, for instance, the workflow dashboard is not something the user can see easily. So that's one of the ways I've kind of finessed that. Like if they're going to do a new window, and eventually they could do the new window, they could click the button to get to the dashboard, and then they could, in theory, go back to their other window without closing the dashboard. And so, you know, it's a problem I didn't really need to solve, because this case, these users don't even like know how to open a new window.
So in this use case, they're already constrained to a single window design anyway. So
exactly, right. They basically are, but it's a really good point. You know, like if you're, you know, maybe you have to test for the number of windows and then bring up an alert that the user has to dismiss, which then refreshes the window or something like that. Yeah.
Well, you'd have to run a looping script on that window just to count the duration, count the time that it's been open. What about the cascading refreshes? So you've got a refresh on the layout, and then you've got an individual refresh if you click into any given portal.
Yeah, that might work, actually. That probably would.
It'd be fast enough that you wouldn't see it, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because the biggest issue with the refresh was when I was doing the coding and wanting to test it. And I'm like, God damn it, I have to refresh this window. Yeah, so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So Lynn, I've tried to follow your instructions and I've resisted the temptation to look at the chat window. So I'm hoping I was told not to do that, and that just to pay attention to my presentation. But if there's anything in there I should be looking at.
Well, Matt's had a couple of interesting comments that he finds sortable portals easier if you use virtual lists.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And actually, maybe that's a bullet I left out. I mean, the number one development constraint in that solution is all of the inherited madness, right? There's like pre-existing, it's like a pre-existing condition. There are pre-existing portals all over the place that I just showed two, but that they've started to ask to sort. So in that particular case, it would be a lot of work to like reimagine the whole, you know, a lot of the relational structure and doing the whole virtual, like the portal exists, right? So
Right.
what is the quickest way to just get it to sort? But I think it's a very legitimate point. And if I was starting from scratch, you know, building something and knowing I was going to want to sort it, I would probably do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you do any error checking on the replace step, because it will fail silently if a record is locked? as Matt also points out.
Yes, correct. And the answer is yes. And yeah, in certain use cases, like if it's a super, like if there's a ton of users doing tons of stuff, then you're going to have a high instance of that. In my use case, basically one error check and another pass through, pretty much did the trick. But yeah, it's a very valid point. And like I said, none of the other solutions I was hoping to just steal from seem to really address that any better. So I just did that myself too.
Great. Well, thank you. Any other questions?
Hey, yeah, I got one. Alexi, you mentioned something. I'm multitasking here, playing around with setting a global field and having a calc look off it and setting the global field list of record IDs. And did you say that you tried that and it was non-performant over a wide area network? I don't have one at my fingertips, but
no, but when I was reading the blogs of all of those other solutions that did that, people in the comments already complained about it, and so I knew it wasn't going to work well for me, or at least I suspected it wasn't. So I didn't do the code myself to prove it, but
yeah, I have to test it. I'm using list of, which showed up in 13 against record ID, because I've heard rumors that that's performant to use kind of metadata type HBand stuff. But I'll go back and look at the blogs. So awesome, thanks.
Okay.
I can put that slide up. There's no reason to necessarily just look at the database if that would be, it's this slide here.
I'll take a screenshot in case they're recording.
Yeah.
Oh, we are we?
And I actually think the Soliant blog post actually links to the other two as well. So if you find one of them, I think you can find the other two. But
sure, it seems like a cool feature to implement. So I did a sorting list with a toggle, which was kind of, riffing on what you're doing. A nice thing where it toggles, where you click it twice, it flips. Because I'm preserving a $$ sort stack.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 2-part stack. It's like, what did you click last?
Right. Yeah.
And did you click it twice in a row, which mimics the Apple user interface. I did that for list views. Now I'm like, no, I think my portals are getting jealous here, so I got to roll it out for those.
Yeah, if you looked carefully at my code, you may have noticed that the portal parameter is just a single $, because that's not important to save after the script runs. But anticipating my little to-do for the next round of this script, I've already set the portal sort field to a $$ for exactly that reason.
Yeah, roadmap.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Okay, anyone else? Well, we're going to thank Alexi for her magnificent presentation. And anytime you're getting that urge to present, give us a call or send an email when it builds up on you.
Right.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun, more fun than I thought I would, even just preparing for it. I'm like, woohoo, a slide deck.
Stretching those old muscles. Yeah, great. Okay, so I guess we're going to call it a wrap, and obviously contact Bob Shockey if you have any great content to share with us. And thank you everyone for being here from however far away you have come.
Thanks for hosting, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn.
No problem.
Thanks all.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Going to end the stop recording.